For 2 weeks, we so struggled to find nice accommodation. Reached out to friends and fellow colleagues, and yes, a bit of response coming through that. We'll sneak that into the Friday mailbag. But someone else has pulled over. What is it about people pulling over today? Saying, I've found a place to pull over. I don't like Tori Amos, but her husband, Robert Fripp, is amazing. Ed, Amon, Nahini Baruch, thank you for your time. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next. I'm back 3:45 tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Heidi Akine breaking the cone of silence. Auckland's mayor launches a war on the excessive use of orange witches' hats. Vector's got an issue with the cacophony of cones too. Its CEO is live. Critical road repairs reunite families and put school sports teams back in the game. We talk to a Napier principal. Meanwhile, Auckland rail commuters can expect disruptions tonight. An ultra-marathon prize pool that prompted a runaway debate on sexism in sport. And the ferry fiasco that's left thousands of people's travel plans all at sea. And deer hunters get ready to roar. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. An MP who was only sworn in as a Cabinet Minister last month is the new Police Minister. Ginny Anderson replaces Stuart Nash, who resigned last week after boasting in a radio interview about calling the Police Commissioner about a case where he thought the sentence was too light. She was given the portfolios of small business, seniors and the digital economy and communications. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says Miss Anderson will be a safe pair of hands with the police portfolio.
Ginny Anderson is familiar with the police portfolio. She's been the chair of the Justice Select Committee. When I've looked at what I want to see from the Minister of Police, I think she's very well suited to take up that role.
However, National's police spokesperson Mark Mitchell says the appointment shows the government has given up on law and order. The Mayor of Wellington says the council can't stop a British anti-trans activist from holding a rally in a public square. Kelly J. Keane-Minshall, also known as Posey Parker, is due to address rallies in Auckland and Wellington next weekend. Tori Whānau says Ms. Keane-Minshall's views are grotesque.
But I know the community, I trust them to come together. My understanding is that a counter-protest is being organised. We also have Cuba Duper this weekend, which I know will be all about celebrating diversity, and we'll be ensuring that our rainbow whānau feel welcome in our own city.
Tori Whānau says she'll join protesters at the event in Wellington. The Employment Court has heard the Crown dropped the ball in the mid-1990s by failing to help Gloriavale deal with sexual offending. Shepherd Samuel Vella is giving evidence in a case brought by 6 former Gloriavale women who are seeking a ruling that they were employees. Their barrister, Brian Henry, questioned Mr Vella about whether the Crown let the community down by not acting on the contents of 2 Court of Appeal judgments in the 90s, detailing Gloriavale founder Hopeful Christian's crimes.
What I'm putting to you is the Crown dropped the ball. The Crown knew he was dominant, and the Crown knew that he was going to carry on in the isolated community without changing, because that's what the judges said. That's correct, isn't it?
That would be a reasonable thing to think.
Samuel Vella says it's possible Crown support could have changed everything back then, but Gloriavale still bears some responsibility. Shares in the New Zealand market closed on the day's lows in line with market weakness in Asia Pacific. The NZX Top 50 index fell nearly 1.5% following a takeover of the troubled global bank Credit Suisse by rival Swiss bank UBS over the weekend. The deal, brokered by Swiss authorities, is the first rescue of a global bank since the financial crisis of 2008 and follows the recent collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in the United States. An Auckland taxi driver is welcoming the Mayor's crackdown on the city's road cones. Wayne Brown is calling for Auckland Transport to reduce what he says is an unjustifiable $145 million spent on traffic management. This taxi driver, based at the downtown Ferry terminal, says the cones are a headache.
The fact is, at times we see cones lined up and there is no work happening. It makes sense when there is a work in progress and people are diverted from one street to the other. But we see there are cones still sitting on the road, but no work is happening.
And hundreds of people who don't mind the cold are putting up their hand for 40 seasonal roles on offer in Antarctica. Applications closed yesterday for a series of jobs ranging from cleaners to mechanics, plumbers and engineers on Scott Base for 6 months next year. Antarctica New Zealand spokesperson Megan Nicol says there's always high demand for domestic roles.
That's cleaning toilets and mopping floors and things like that. We still require people to have experience to do those jobs, so they need to show us that they are good at cleaning. Ask my 15-year-old son, not everyone is good at cleaning. The jobs that we find difficult to get are those highly skilled jobs that are hard to find in New Zealand throughout, and that's things like plumbers and electricians.
In sport, the Black Caps are edging closer to victory within 4 days in the second test against Sri Lanka in Wellington. A short time ago, the visitors were 337 for 7 in their second innings, still trailing by 80 after following on. The Football Ferns will play Iceland and Nigeria in Turkey next month as part of their build-up to the Women's World Cup in New Zealand and Australia in July. They'll play Iceland on Saturday, April the 8th, and Nigeria 4 days later. Felicity Reid reports.
The confirmation of the Nigeria match means the Ferns will have played aside from every FIFA confederation outside of Oceania in preparation for the World Cup. The games will also be the side's last overseas fixtures before they assemble for a 2-month pre-World Cup camp at the end of May. Coach Jitka Kumkova says the games provide a chance to put the disappointment of February's losses to Portugal and Argentina behind them. New Zealand last played Iceland a year ago in California, losing 1-0, while they haven't played Nigeria previously.
And the switch to LIV golf has paid off for New Zealand's Danny Lee, who won his first tournament since 2015 today. He won the second event of the LIV season in Tucson, Arizona, and only his second appearance since joining the Saudi-backed tour from the PGA last month. The win comes with $6 million in prize money. That's the news.
Troubles in early education.
Fixing funding takes a lot of time, but if we don't act quickly, these small centres won't last.
More criticism of consultants.
You come back to how good are your consultants, how good is the advice you're getting, and here it hasn't been good.
And getting political intel. There's no way the public can find out about these guys. They pretty much operate in the shadows. There's also no restrictions on this revolving door, this transition between top government jobs and lobbying jobs.
Lifting the lid. Morning report weekdays at 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Warnings and watches are in force for heavy rain and strong winds about central and southern Aotearoa, New Zealand. For Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, also for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. A few showers tomorrow, then a period of rain from the afternoon. From Waipomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui and Taihape, also Wairarapa, showers at times, but a period of rain tomorrow morning with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Taranaki. Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain overnight, mainly fine tomorrow, but showers in the afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland and Fiordland. Rain spreading north to reach Bulla this evening with heavy falls and thunderstorms, becoming fine south of Hokitika tomorrow morning and elsewhere later. For Canterbury, occasional rain persistent tomorrow with heavy falls. Otago and Southland, rain developing today with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, fine today. A few showers tomorrow, then rain at night. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 5:20.
Ngā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Unjustifiable disruption is how Auckland's mayor has labelled road cones dotted through the city. And Wayne Brown is calling on several big organisations to work out how traffic management can be improved to cut back on lane closures. The number of road cones used, he says, is excessive and unnecessary. Wayne Brown wants Auckland Transport to explain its $145 million spent on traffic management and trial a new way to cut back. Our reporter Louise Ternouth and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
Auckland City is no stranger to orange cones. Downtown is full of them.
I made the comment that somebody must be making a lot of money out of these things. Certainly on the highways, you're constantly finding them. They're there for a very good reason, I imagine, but there seem to be an awful lot of them. Well, I think there's an overuse of them, to be perfectly honest.
There's more and more and more, and it's just a nice cash cow for the road cone people and the construction workers.
I don't know that it would be something that would particularly upset me, although somebody did make a joke to me once about buying shares in the road cones many years ago, and you'd probably be quite rich by now.
Well, I think they must be getting paid by the number they put out.
Mayor Wayne Brown says he's determined to reduce the economic and social disruptions caused by temporary traffic management. He says how long roadworks take, the frequency of lane closures and the number of road cones used is excessive and unnecessary. Today he laid out a plan to tackle temporary traffic management woes. It includes a more tailored and targeted traffic management plan with a 6-month trial beginning immediately. Improving programming and coordination of construction and maintenance work taking place within the road corridor, and an independent report to quantify the costs and benefits of how Auckland Transport handles traffic management. That's being welcomed by this taxi driver who's based at the downtown Ferry terminal. Cones are his biggest disruption.
It becomes a very costly exercise, especially for the riders, because taxi meter is running and while you are stuck in the queue and deviating from this street to that and all that, you know. But the fact is, at times we see cones lined up and there is no walk happening, you see. It makes sense when there is a walk in progress and people are diverted from one street to the other. But we see there are cones still sitting on the road, but no walk is happening.
This cyclist is also in favour.
Well, I've got my helmet on. As a cyclist, I notice they're always in the cycle lane and I have to verge into traffic more often, but I'm sure pedestrians would be the same.
Finally, we come across someone who works with road cones every day. This road worker is directing pedestrians around cones in Britomart. He says without road cones, things would be extremely unsafe.
Unsafe, I guess, you know. Well, these cones and everything is protection for everybody. Some people don't listen. They can just do whatever they want.
Wayne Brown also says he wants contractors to reduce how much space on the roads the cones take up. But this worker says the spacing of cones is following strict guidelines.
What's kind of the formula or the strategy with that? Because a lot of people say they're put out too far than they need to be.
We follow the TMP, Traffic Management Plan, so we have that all the time in my paperwork. And in that thing is we have the plans all the time. Where's the cones going? What the spacing looks like, and you know. But yeah.
There's a strategy behind it.
Yeah, there is.
In a statement, Auckland Transport says it welcomes the Mayor's backing for a more tailored traffic management plan. National standards are currently under review by Waka Kotahi, with new draft guidelines already being trialled, and it's hoping to progress on potential Auckland trials. Discussions on next steps, including utility providers and road maintenance contractors, are scheduled for later this month. In the meantime, frustration continues for those navigating the city of cones.
The CBD is terrible. I've been back here for about 5 years, and it's just a mess. And every day I have to walk a different way from my place to the CBD because the road is blocked.
And if you're listening to that story on radio, you can check out the video version. We'll put it on our website. Well, it seems everyone loves to hate the orange witches' hats, cones, that line many Auckland streets. Among them, Powerline's company Vector, and its CEO Simon McKenzie joins us now. Kia ora, Simon. What's the problem for you guys in terms of traffic management in these cones?
Yeah, hi Lisa. Look, first and foremost, obviously we're really focused on making sure our crews are safe and public safe, but for us, it's we operate to a very prescriptive requirements under Auckland Transport, and we think that there's a much better way that it can be done, where it's much more of a risk-based approach and taking into account, the areas, the volume of traffic, what is the risk, time of day, what is the requirements for a setup of the cones, and how can they also be shifted at different times of day to make it better for customers.
So Can you give us a bit more detail? What is the issue specifically with the way they want you to do things at the moment?
Look, I think very much at the moment is a good example. We had a fault in the Mount Wellington area on Sunday. The approach basically says for this type of road, you have to do this type of traffic management setup. We have to go through quite an extensive planning process to set that up. It can take longer than what we would otherwise believe is necessary for that time of day. A Sunday, the traffic's light. In the past, our crews who are absolutely focused on obviously their safety and public safety would have set up the traffic management to take into account that by a risk-based approach, but we have to follow the process that's largely prescribed, which means that it's more costly and takes longer than what we would normally expect.
So in short, you think it's overkill?
Yeah, I think it's basically not dynamic enough. I think it's too structured and too set. It's not taking into account what is things such as time of day, volume of traffic, area. We have some prescriptions where a cul-de-sac, for example, you just look at some of the setup required in a simple cul-de-sac. It's overkill compared to what we would normally expect to obviously maintain safety for people and the crews.
The Mayor says it has an unjustifiable economic and social disruption and cost. So can you give us some perspective, costs for Vector around traffic management?
Yeah, look, to put that in perspective, we spend anywhere from $30 to $35 million a year on traffic management. So, that goes on the costs of projects to customers. We don't put any margin on that. It's just basically we have to engage traffic management companies to undertake that work for us. If there's a capital project, for example, to do a development for a customer, then that's part of the cost. And quite often, customers get a hell of a surprise when they see the cost of a project and they see that, 30, 40% of the cost is actually traffic management. So, I think this comes back down to how do we get a risk-based approach working together with the other utility operators to get a much better cost outcome for everyone.
Simon, do you seriously have some projects where traffic management is 30 to 40% of the entire cost of the project?
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think it should be?
Well, I think in those cases, probably, if you go back in time, it's probably more around 10 to 15% is the reality of it nowadays. I think that's just a rough estimate, but I think there's certainly a much higher cost, and we've seen that increase over the years, particularly as Auckland's grown, but also with changes to things like health and safety legislation. So, we think it should be quite materially lower than that, but not compromising safety.
Well, I suppose that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? How much risk is acceptable, and in your view, how much is acceptable?
Well, absolutely. I don't believe there's a risk that we should be putting, to our crews and also to the communities. But I think that's an assessment that's better made in a real-time situation by the crews that are expert in this space. I don't think you can prescribe through a set of rules what that should look like. It should be outcomes focused.
But don't you run the risk of then having cowboys and girls? Like, you might want to follow the rules, but other people may not.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't necessarily think that that doesn't occur now anyway. But I think the situation is that there can be a audit regime that's put in place where there are known works, and people can go and check that they do believe there is an appropriate level of safety. I mean, certainly from our side, when we engage our contractors to do our electrical work, that's one of the prerequisites to show what capability and competency you have to do the electrical work, the civil works, and it's no different to basically say, are they meeting the required standards that we would expect for traffic management as well?
Interesting to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. That's Vector's CEO, Simon McKenzie there. Let us know what you think about all those traffic cones around Auckland. 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 17 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint. A grand prize for a record-breaking finish in a South Island ultra marathon has sparked an even bigger international debate about sexism. Organisers of the South Island Ultra Race offered a $10,000 cash prize to the first person to break 8 hours in the 100-kilometre race along the West Coast Wilderness Track that starts in Greymouth and ends in Hokitika. A backlash followed, with critics claiming the cash prize overwhelmingly favoured men who are more likely to make the 8-hour goal than women. Organisers have since changed the prize pool, and John and Carol Moore run the events company behind the race, CJM's Events. And John joins us now. Hi, John. Did you imagine what a can of worms this would open?
No, not really at all.
So what do you make of the discussion that it sparked?
It's totally fair. We had an aim. We wanted to see people, see if someone could break 8 hours on the event. With the men's record at 8:21 and 45 seconds, and the women's record at 8:24:03, which is doesn't even get near a 0.1 percentage difference. So we put up a prize to see who could be the first person. Created an outrage with what was ended up as personal attacks at us from people who we didn't even know, and we were basically decided whether would we pull it all together. But then thought, well, okay, let's put $10,000 a piece. For anyone who can break 8 hours, the male in the male category and the first person in the female.
Okay, so the personal attacks aside, which are not acceptable in any circumstances, do you accept the criticism that the original offer was sexist?
No, it wasn't, because either party could do it. It's clearly not sexist. It's still equality for it, because either party could win it. So last year, the first, third and sixth across the line were females. So the poor guys, they got beaten. And the event itself, and you look at the history of the event over the years, females have performed outstandingly on that trail. So, yeah, the argument is very clear on that trail. The history, that's what you can look at. You can't go and look at a 100K world records, because they run on an athletics track around a 400 metre. So it's the same for everyone every time they go to do it. But what about
the evidence that some elite athletes have put into the public domain, where they say that physiologically there's a difference between the two genders? Men are racing at a performance level that's 8% faster, between 8 and 14% faster than the women. So it's more likely that the guys would collect the prize pool.
That's on a athletics track, running round and round a 400 metre track. So that's the only way you can judge yourself between your 8 and you, because this trail is 100K, and it's the same 100K each time. No one's ever beaten 8 hours, so we just wanted to see the 8 hours. It's a bit like going to say who was the first person to break a 4-minute mile. Maybe the Bannister
John, why did you change the prize pool if you thought there was nothing wrong with it? Because now you're offering 10 apiece, aren't you? If a woman breaks the 8-hour mark, you'll give them 10K, and a man breaks the 8-hour mark, they'll get 10K as well. So why did you change it if you didn't think there was anything wrong with it?
I wouldn't think there's anything wrong with it. We thought, okay, we'll appease it really, and say here's 10 for each.
So, just to be clear, you put no stock in the evidence that various athletes have produced and international coaches about the physiological differences between the two genders, and the fact that it's more likely a man will break that record, and it will be easier for a man to reach and attain that record than it would for a woman.
No, it's not. It's basically, we have not seen a man, and we're not seeing a female achieve running any faster than 8 hours 21. So we said we'd do a time. We believe it's the fastest trail in New Zealand. So we wanted to see if 8 hours could be beaten. So we put up a price for it.
You don't think those time differentials and performance percentages should be taken into account? An example would be, for example, you give 10K for a male who breaks the 8-hour record, and if you take in the 10%, let's take an average, the 10% performance difference, you offer the woman 10K for getting 10% over that.
Right. When you want to look at your percentages, we run other ultra marathons, the Aotearoa Ultra Marathon, which is a 101k event. The record for that is 13 hours and 2 minutes, and the women's time record for that is 13 hours 17 minutes. That's 1% different. So if you wanted to look at that event, and if you wanted to look at the South Island Ultra Marathon event, you've got two different races, which are ours, and we run them, we understand them, and the difference in those times was 1%. We went through a full assessment with a lot of people, and everyone believed that it was achievable by both parties. Then after we got criticised for what we were doing, we sat down and we looked at it and we said, okay, let's do 10,000 each. So it's a $20,000 prize pool. So instead of knocking people for putting something up, it is better if we withdraw it, and everyone can just run for whatever the prizes are that we give, which are all equal through all the age groups and everything. So we put something up. I don't see any other event organisers in New Zealand putting that up for anything. So
thank you for clarifying that, John. We really appreciate your time. That is John Moore there, who's he's with the events company that's behind that ultra marathon race. They're now putting up 10 grand a piece for any woman who breaks the 8-hour mark and any male athlete also. Is that fair? Do you think it should be different? Let us know, 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 24 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your views on all the road cones in and around Auckland. Too much or just about the right amount? The Goldilocks factor. Let us know, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also, your thoughts on the prize pool for male and female athletes. Should they have different targets to reach? Physiological differences, different research showing that they run at different speeds? Thoughts on that would be interesting too. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko Evi Anō tēnei.
An MP who was only sworn in as a cabinet minister last month is the new police minister, replacing Stuart Nash. But Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says Ginny Anderson is a safe pair of hands, having worked for the police for more than 10 years before entering politics and having chaired the Justice Select Committee. The Mayor of Wellington says the views of a British anti-transgender activist are grotesque, but the City Council doesn't have the power to stop her from holding a rally in Civic Square. Tory whānau says she herself will be joining a protest against Kelly J. Keane-Mitchell. Auckland's mayor has gone on the attack against the road cones dotted through the city. Wayne Brown says the excessive number of cones is causing unjustifiable disruption. He wants Auckland Transport to explain spending $145 million on traffic management. The Foreign Minister leaves for China tomorrow, the first visit there by a New Zealand minister since 2019. Nanaia Mahuta will meet with her Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang, in Beijing. She says she intends to raise New Zealand's concerns about regional and global security challenges, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the Black Caps are closing in on victory over Sri Lanka in the second test in Wellington a short time ago. The visitors were 340 for 8 in their second innings, still 76 runs short of making New Zealand bat again. Those are the headlines. Going to traffic, State Highway 50 in Napier at the intersection with Pandora Road has been closed because of a crash. Expect delays. And in Wellington, State Highway 2, the Dimutaka Hill, a strong winds warning is currently in place for that area. Also tonight, Mount Vic Tunnel is closed for maintenance. Our next news headlines and traffic news is at 20 to 6.
Thank you, Evie. After 2 nail-biting test wins, the Black Caps are closing in on a dominant victory over Sri Lanka in Wellington. Strong winds have made conditions at the Basin Reserve tough for all involved today. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, touched on it in the headlines there, Felicity, but give us an idea of how things have played out.
Yeah, well, Sri Lanka were always on the back foot going into day 4 this morning. They needed to add 303 more runs to make New Zealand bat again. So as we just heard with Evie there, they're currently currently on 348. So New Zealand just need a couple more wickets there to wrap it up. So this is day 4. So that would give them an extra day and an innings because Sri Lanka were following on from New Zealand's big first innings total. As we can see from this, Sri Lanka did actually just provide a bit of resistance, and that was Jajan De Silva. He was involved in some big 5th and 6th wicket partnerships, but he was then spun out by Michael Bracewell and for 98. So just short of his 100 there, which is a bit of a disappointing one for them because even in what's I think going to be a losing result for Sri Lanka, it's good for them to be able to have some players make some stand out as well. And for New Zealand, that was a little bit unusual for a spinner to be having such an impact. Spin at the Basin Reserve is not something we normally see, and Michael Bracewell took 3 wickets in the first innings, and he's taken 2 in the second. Taking for the 98 as well as he also took the 8th wicket. Paceman Blair Tickner has also had a knack today of taking some wickets at important times. He was the one who took the wicket just before tea that really exposed the lower order and has got New Zealand into the position that they're in now as well. But that wind, for the whole test, it's been rain that delayed the first day, and now the wind there's heavy bales been on for this whole test match. But if you've been watching it at home, you've probably noticed that they had to take down one lot of cameras on the Adelaide Road end, the camera tower. It was too windy, so they've had to take down those cameras. So we're watching it kind of old school cricket style, one camera straight down the pitch.
Wow, thank you, Wellington, for that. Right, so let's move on to the New Zealand golfer. Danny Lee has won for the first time since 2015, but this is an interesting win, isn't it?
Yes, Danny Lee made a bit of a switch up a month ago. He left the PGA Tour for Live Golf. So Live Golf, Saudi-backed tour, which a lot of players are getting sort of, lured away from the PGA Tour because of the amount of money that can be on offer for them. So Danny Lee has been around the PGA for a while. He played 303 events in the PGA and won once. So that was 2015. That was his last win and only win. So he's made this move to Live. It's paid off basically instantly. Second tournament for Live Golf, and this was in Arizona today. He's won it, and it was a 4-man playoff, so that's only the second time in Live Golf that there's actually been a playoff, but he's won it in the playoff, which has given him a $6 million cheque, which this is, big deal from one, because last season in the PGA he only won $1.26 million US. So in one event he's managed to earn so much more than he did last time. So you can kind of see for a player like that who maybe wasn't reaching the heights of even, say, the Ryan Foxes or obviously the Rory McIlroys, people like that, I can see why they do make the move to the more controversial
controversial, obviously, because of it's been accused of sports washing and human rights.
Exactly, and where is this money that he's winning coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Felicity. That is our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. Auckland rail commuters can expect disruptions as they head home this evening due to a slip on the tracks near Parnell. Train services are down to one track between the central transport hub of Britomart and Newmarket, while Kiwi Rail carries out urgent repairs. Kiwi Rail's General Manager of Metro, John Knight, is hoping they'll be able to clear the line in time for tomorrow's commuter rush.
With the disruption in Parnell, what has happened is that from the Auckland anniversary weather event, there was a large slip on the top of the tunnel, which compromised the integrity of the tunnel, and it needed some monitoring equipment and some sensor equipment put in to monitor that and to allow us to do some enabling works. What's now happened, Lisa, is that it's now the integrity of it has caused another slip, and we have to go back in and do some remediation works.
Okay, so I'm just wondering how come it's all come to a head right now? You were aware of the slip, were you, the original damage?
Yeah, so we always do inspections of the network, and the original damage was identified during the Auckland anniversary, and then we needed to take steps to do proper design and remediation planning, and then we planned those works for the eastern block of line because they would be significant. And then there has been more instability based on the monitoring, and we've had another slip, and that's where we are today. And this evening we're going in to remediate that to open tomorrow morning for peak services.
Are you confident that you will be able to open as normal tomorrow morning?
Yeah, Lisa, we've taken all appropriate steps, and we're quite confident that we'll make that. We work with our rail partners, both AT and Auckland One Rail, and through good partnered planning and through our civils and our work, we think we have a very high probability of openings to peak for tomorrow morning with minimal disruption to customer.
High probability, John. When will you know for sure that you're able to make that deadline?
So we'll be monitoring overnight, and at 0400 tomorrow morning, we will make a call to extend the works if need be. But we're confident that we won't need to eat into that morning peak service, and we believe we'll be complete by 0400 to allow our customers and the people of Auckland to get to work.
What about commuters tonight? How does this affect them?
Commuters tonight, they'll be affected. We're ramping down slightly early, so on that Newmarket section, vicinity Parnell Tunnel, we're actually we work with AT and Auckland One Rail, and we will look at the last service being at around 2000 or 8 p.m. tonight. That will enable us to get into work early by 2100 and start our remediation work, which gives us the additional window for us to complete on time for tomorrow morning.
But John, I'm just wondering, can trains get in and out of Britomart? What is the situation? Do people have to transfer to buses, and whereabouts is that happening?
So AT are covering the train plan and the disruption of services. So they'll be putting out communications to customers on that.
But bottom line, John, can a train get into Britomart from Newmarket? Yes or no?
You have limited train frequency intervals in and out of Britomart at this stage. The slip is only on the up main, so we are single line running, which means you can move trains in and out on one line at a reduced timetable.
So it's your capacity that's been cut by this?
It's the capacity, yes, and the frequency of services to customers.
And that's John Knight from Kiwi Rail, 26 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is business o'clock. Time for the business news. Ko taku hoa in Nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Nona, NZX has changed its mind about who should be the next chair of the board. So what's going on?
Yeah, the NZX, that's the capital markets operator, had selected Rob Hamilton, who was the former CFO at Sky City, to step into the role. But because Sky City is now facing legal action in Australia over the operations at its Adelaide casino, they've decided that might not be the right choice. So Mr. Hamilton, he's going to step down as an independent director. He's not going to be the chair. And the existing chair is going to stay in the job until they can find a successor. And that's so James Miller keeps his job for now.
And financial advisors have got to be fully licensed now to offer retail advice to customers. What does that mean?
So as of Friday, you had to have a full license to be a financial service provider for retail customers. And that's new. So there was a new law brought in about 4 years ago, 2 years of transition. You could get a transitional license and so on, but no more. Now you must be fully licensed. That means that you're adhering to a new code of conduct, which covers not only just your practice, but also ethics. That's so now if you're shopping around for a financial service provider, you can go to the Financial Service Providers Register online and find one there.
Okay. And what market numbers do you bring, please?
Okay, so the market has been a really topsy-turvy sort of day. We had some quite big news over the weekend of another global bank. This was Credit Suisse having trouble, of course, and then a takeover orchestrated by the Swiss authorities. So another Swiss bank, a rival of Credit Suisse, was going to take it over. That's now in the works. And so today, Asian banks, where Credit Suisse has operations, they opened normally. So that's a positive sign. That might have helped, settle the market a little bit. Certainly this morning, our market opened up. It was pretty subdued, but once Australia opened and then Asia, things really took off. So we fell 1.4%. and 161 points down to 11,565. The New Zealand dollar was trading around 63 US cents this morning. It's dropped back to 62.5 cents. Now 93.4 Australian, 51.4 British pence. This is a story that's going to keep on giving because the U.S. Federal Reserve, there's a lot of questions now about whether or not it's going to hike interest rates later this week. An announcement is expected on Thursday. The market is picking maybe a quarter of a percentage point. We've heard the U.S. Federal Reserve say they were going to go hard in the past, but now they're going to have to balance financial stability with inflation. Not an easy ask. We won't know what's going to happen until Thursday.
I'm sure you will bring us all the news when it happens. That's Nona Peltier with Business News there. It is, 22 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Road cones, not particularly popular, are the old road cones. This person says the cones are lined up when there is no work to ensure when the trucks come along they can park and do the work. Another says Tikawiti road cones, no problem. Vandals just toss them in the river here. I don't know if that's the best solution. Another person says Wayne Brown should count himself bloody lucky he wasn't in Christchurch after the quakes if he doesn't like cones. And Mike says it's not only an Auckland problem, try Nelson, Tasman for overkill. Brian's come up with a suggestion, Brian of Ngā Hi, Brian. Brian says Wayne Brown just needs to find a way to tax road cones. And Chris from Tauranga says it's not just Auckland. The Bay of Plenty has the same problem, heaps of cones when just a few would do. So are they paid by the cone? I'd love to know how much a road cone costs. Does anyone know? Let us know. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Someone else says Wayne Brown's biggest problems, road cones, really? And apparently road cones are a problem all around the country. Go to Milford Sound, State Highway 94. Remote New Zealand road, cones get closer together than pickets on my picket fence. A lot of people are making a lot of money at the expense of the rest of us. On the subject of the prize pool, this is for the ultra race. It's 100 kilometres and the prize offer, originally it was 10Ks for whoever broke the 8 hour mark, but now they're offering a prize 10Ks for the first woman to do that and 10K for the first man. This person says a woman would have to work harder to win. It's simple. Jenny says this guy is great, meaning the race organiser. The real story here is that people shouldn't read negative social media. Do keep your feedback coming. Homai o whakaaro. Tell us what you think about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text is 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's here with the headlines now. Anaya Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
An MP who was only sworn in as a Cabinet Minister last month is the new Police Minister, replacing Stuart Nash. But Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says Ginny Anderson is a safe pair of hands, having worked for the police for more than 10 years before entering politics and having chaired the Justice Select Committee. Immigration New Zealand is looking into whether a British anti-transgender activist should be allowed into the country after neo-Nazis attended one of her events in Australia. Wellington Mayor Tory Whānau says the views of Kelly J. Keane-Mitchell are grotesque, but the City Council doesn't have the power to stop her from holding a rally in Civic Square. Auckland's mayor has gone on the attack against the road cones dotted through the city. Wayne Brown says the excessive number of cones is causing unjustifiable disruption. The Chief Ombudsman has ruled that the Auckland Council was right not to publicly notify an application to locate an Erebus memorial in the Parnell Rose Gardens. Peter Boscher says its officers weren't biased towards the applicant, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. And Fish and Game says a hard look needs to be taken at how rivers are managed. Nearly 2,000 birds have been found washed up in the Whangamarino wetland in northern Waikato in the past month. Because of poor water quality, a deadly bacteria infected birds, which drowned after becoming paralysed. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. In Auckland, just west of the central city on the northwestern motorway, a multi-car and motorbike crash is blocking the second of 4 lanes just before St Luke's off-ramp. That will be causing serious delays. In Napier, State Highway 50 at the intersection with Pandora Road has been closed because of a crash there. And in Wellington, there are strong wind warnings in place currently for Dimutaka Hill. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā, Eho. The reopening of a critical cyclone-damaged state highway means students can be reunited with their families and school sports teams are back in the national game. Basically, all traffic is now able to drive the Napier-Taupo Road, but only between 7am and 7pm. There's still more than 30 spots along State Highway 5 that need work, and full repairs could take a year. Meanwhile, State Highway 2, the route north between Napier to Gisborne, remains impassable in places. Chair of Hawke's Bay Secondary School Principals Association and Napier Girls High Principal Dawn Ackroyd joins us now. Kia ora, Dawn. What does State Highway 5 opening mean for your students?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Oh, look, it's great news. It certainly is a milestone in moving forward. What it does mean is a lot of our region we have boarders that come from Taupo, and it means now that they are able to get home, and that is such a relief. For a lot of our boarding students, they haven't been home since the beginning of the year, so it's a great milestone. Also, next week we have our summer tournament week. We have our sailing regatta in Taupo and wakaama in Rotorua, and it just means that they are able now to access rather than go the long way around via Manawatu.
And so what's the difference, Dawn? What's the difference time-wise being able to take the state highway versus the long way round?
Oh, it'll be at least 5 hours difference. Even though State Highway 5 is open, it's normally an hour and a half trip. I suspect it will be a little bit longer. In sections it will only be one way, but much better than a 5-6 hour trip sort of heading south to Palmerston North and then heading up through State Highway 1. So, yeah, no, it's great news.
Are the students excited?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they are. And we're all sort of waiting now for State Highway 2 to be opened. We have quite a few students from our area that do come from Tairāwhiti region. And so, again, a lot of them haven't been home since the start of the year. So we're fingers crossed that they get that road open soon. I do want to give our thanks to Waka Kotahi, who have worked really hard, to make those roads accessible once again.
What's it like for the students who haven't managed to get home since the start of the year? That's quite a long time away from your family.
Oh, it is, Lisa. It's been tough. It's been really tough. But, the girls in our school in particular have been very resilient, and they're out there supporting one another. They're actually the ones that are in here over the weekends have been out into the community helping with some volunteering, mowing lawns and with the silt, clearing up the silt efforts. They have been fantastic. And I had a heartwarming story of two sisters, one in Year 9, of course, that hasn't been home since the start of the year, Year 11, and they were able to get a drive to Portorino, which is north. And that is only open, sort of restricted access. Then they had to walk 3 kilometres across a railway line, and then they got picked up in private property. Their mum collected them and took them home, and it was a surprise for Dad and the brother, who they said Dad was speechless. So a very heartwarming story, but a long time for them to get home. And then they turned around on Sunday and did the same trek back.
Dawn, it sounds like the Amazing Race.
Yes, I know, but it meant a lot for those students, yeah.
Absolutely. So how have others managed to get home? I mean, if you can't go up State Highway 2 to get to Gisborne, what options have they had to exercise? Apart from that trek, what are your other options?
Well, I've got to say the hostel whānau, they've really pulled together and they've been quite creative. We've had chartered flights from Tairāwhiti, in particular Kiwi Air to Bridge Pa. Air New Zealand re-established links with Tairāwhiti, which has been fantastic, and it was just announced that they're extending that up until next term, which is great. We've had girls in helicopters. It's just been amazing, and in times like this, those hostel girls are pretty resilient, and the families have all got together and have been quite creative.
What's it mean for the school, Dawn, in terms of pastoral care? Because it's obviously another thing that you've got to be aware of, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, look, that's been huge, Lisa. And I do have to say it's been great to get our schools in the area back up and running. However, the initial focus was on the welfare checks of all our students, but getting back into a routine, back into their studies, as well as back into extracurricular has been really important. All students have been affected. We have at least 20 students that have lost everything, and Lisa literally had to swim for their lives and be rescued off route. So they have been through a lot. So lots of heartbreaking stories, but I've also got to say we have been overwhelmed with the heartwarming stories and support shown not only from our locals but also outside the region. It's just been fantastic. Donations of uniform, food, shoes, morning teas for staff. It's just been incredible. Even one principal in Wellington auctioned off her car park to raise some money for our students. It's just been fantastic. Even notes that the girls have received, notes of aroha and support. So we're focusing on the positives and those heartwarming stories, yeah.
Dawn, a city car park, what a sacrifice. Hey, it's been lovely to talk to you. That is Dawn Ackroyd, who is from Napier Girls High. She is the principal there. 2 weeks after a gearbox issue took an inter-islander ferry out of action, thousands of people have had their bookings cancelled. Many have been rescheduled and able to cross Cook Strait at a different time, but some have not been so lucky. Bookings have been cancelled until this Saturday, though that could be extended, and there is still no definitive timeline for repair for the Kaitaki ferry. Samantha G has more.
It's been a long few weeks of cancelled ferry bookings. Wellington man James Wallace had his return Cook Strait sailing cancelled last month, and while one fare was promptly refunded, he's heard nothing back about the other. The cancellations put an end to a family road trip to take their eldest son to university.
We understood that things happen and this is the case. However, after we hadn't heard anything about the refund after a couple of weeks, I emailed the Inter-Islander asking for an update and I didn't receive a response. And now it's heading towards late March. It's been more than a month and nothing on the refund.
Their return sailing was refunded within 10 minutes of cancelling it.
You know, I do have a kind of feeling of loyalty towards the Inter-Islander, but I certainly wouldn't be dreaming of trying to book a crossing in the next half a year or maybe longer, and indeed may not want to until the new ferry's on board.
Manus Slows sailing to Wellington was also cancelled. After spending several hours trying to get through to Inter-Islander on the phone, he decided to head to the terminal at Picton to try and get on another ferry.
I think my main issue is that it's just very hard to get in touch with anyone who knows what's happening, and if I'd gotten a call and they would have explained what's going on, because I know there's been some issues with the ferries and that, I mean, it happens, there's nothing you can do about it, but the whole lack of communication and being able to reach anyone is very annoying.
With no accommodation in Picton and no ability to get on another sailing, he chose to catch a bus to Christchurch to stay with friends. Atlantis Backpackers co-owner Shira Hudson says she's been fully booked for weeks, but people keep showing up in need of somewhere to stay.
We've had to, make up beds for people, although some of them loved sleeping on the Lazy Boy because it was really comfortable. But, I mean, you can't say there's no room at the inn. That's been done. And we already know the ending of that story. So as much as possible, we've tried to accommodate them as we can.
She says it's been at least a month of cancellations and delays.
And, of course, with Easter coming up, that's another big travel time, and God knows what's going to happen in that week, because there's still, somebody was just saying that the gearbox needs to be fixed, and the gearbox was supposed to be fixed, but it's not.
Inter-Islander is telling people not to head to its terminals, but to call to rebook a sailing. Consumer NZ has already lodged a complaint with the Commerce Commission this year, alleging Inter-Islander and Bluebridge were misleading passengers about their rights. The Commerce Commission says it's currently assessing the information and is yet to decide if it will investigate.
If you've been bumped off one of those ferry crossings still waiting for a booking, love to hear from you. What is your situation? Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And speaking of travel woes, there is a traffic warning for Aucklanders. If you are driving out of the city on the northwestern motorway, there has been a multi-car and motorbike crash in the middle lane just before the St Luke's off-ramp. You can merge to either side and pass with care, but expect delays if you are heading that way. That is on the northwestern and it's near the St Luke's off-ramp. Ginny Anderson is the new police minister. Stuart Nash resigned from the role last week after he boasted about calling the police commissioner about a case where he thought the sentence was too light. National has come out swinging, saying Ginny Anderson's appointment sends the signal Labour has clearly given up on law and order. But despite only being sworn in as a cabinet minister last month, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says the MP for Hutt South is a safe pair of hands. He says she's a former chair of the Justice Select Committee and worked for the police before entering politics.
For 10 years and has experience working there. I'm happy for we'll send out some biographical details of the areas that she has been working on. But actually, probably the more recent and relevant experience is as chair of Parliament's Justice Committee. Of course, she will have had quite a lot of exposure to the police and to the issues that police are dealing with at the moment.
Mr Hipkins says Ms Anderson will have the support of other, more senior colleagues.
The Minister of Justice sits on the front bench. Many of the policy issues that the police deal with are covered by the Justice portfolio, and of course I have an interest in this as well. I can provide an absolute reassurance that law and order and crime will continue to be a key area of focus for the government.
National Police spokesperson Mark Mitchell has issued a statement saying Chris Hipkins has appointed a minister with less than 2 months' experience at the bottom of the cabinet rankings at a time when the country is experiencing the worst crime levels it has ever seen. And a note to listeners and our viewers, Ms Anderson is not at the bottom of the cabinet rankings. That spot is now occupied by Stuart Nash. It is 7 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Immigration New Zealand is reviewing whether a controversial anti-transgender activist will be let into the country. Posey Parker is on a travelling tour around Australia before heading to New Zealand this weekend. Wellington's mayor says there's nothing she can do to stop her using a public space for her rally. Our reporter Rachel Graham has more.
There were angry scenes as Posey Parker, also known as Kelly J. Keane Minchell, spoke at a rally in Melbourne on the weekend. Far-right protesters were dressed in black, giving Nazi salutes, as police held back other protesters who had come out in opposition to the rally. Kelly J. Keane Minchell fronts a group called Standing for Women and is due to hold rallies in Albert Park in Auckland and Civic Square in Wellington this weekend. Wellington Council says Civic Square is a public space, which has hosted many protests and politicians, and it cannot stop Ms Keane Minchell making use of the space. Mayor Tori Whanau says Ms Keane Minchell and her group's anti-trans views are grotesque and not welcome in Wellington. However, she says there is little the council can do to stop the rally due to the Bill of Rights.
But I know the community, I trust them to come together. My understanding is that a counter-protest is being organised. We also have Cuba Duper this weekend, which I know will be all about celebrating diversity, and we'll be ensuring that our rainbow whānau feel welcome in our own city.
The CEO of the Free Speech Union, Jonathan Aileen, says controversial ideas, even offensive ones, should be able to be aired and freely responded to.
The best way to beat bad ideas is by having better ideas put forward. And so if this group is putting forward hateful views, counter it with inclusive views. Don't try and shut them down. That makes them have a faux respectability, and it makes martyrs out of those that might be better ignored. So the best way to address this is with more speech.
Rainbow Greens have called for Ms Keane Minchell to be stopped from entering the country and reiterated that request following the clashes in Melbourne. In a statement, Immigration New Zealand's General Manager, Richard Owen, says as the holder of a United Kingdom passport, Ms Keane Minchell has applied for and been granted a New Zealand Electronic Travel Authority, which means she doesn't need a visa until she arrives in the country. But that decision is now being reviewed.
Immigration New Zealand can confirm that Ms Keen Minshall is the holder of a New Zealand Electronic Travel Authority. Immigration New Zealand is now reviewing whether, in the light of the events at the weekend, Ms Keen Minshall is still able to travel to New Zealand on the basis of the New Zealand Electronic Travel Authority that she holds, without obtaining the visa first.
Police say they are aware of the events planned for Wellington and Auckland, and police will be present to monitor and respond to any issues that may arise, and to minimise disruption to the wider public.
Now to California, where one farmer's quick thinking in a flood has given a new meaning to the line, "I drove my Chevy to the levee." The normally dry US state has had torrential rain and widespread flooding across some regions recently. It was particularly severe in the San Joaquin Valley, where waters burst through a levee and were drowning an orchard. The landowner filled up the beds of 2 utes with soil and sent them into the breach one by one. The moment was caught on video. And what you can hear and see is the video is the farmer putting his Chevy in gear, jumping out of the way as the truck rolls forward with the accelerator weighed down, and his aim is really good. The ute hoons across the track on the top of the levee, plunges down into the water, right into the gap where the flood had burst through. A Ford ute is already in the breach, slowing down the surging water. A neighbouring farmer who shared the video on Twitter posted more images showing the flood water was contained and the orchard was protected. The video went viral on social media and of course attracted many comments about driving the Chevy to the levee, which in this case was not dry. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of it's still coming in regarding the cones. This person said road cones are actually Daleks. The only way to get rid of them is to call Doctor Who. On the price of them, someone's done a price check, fluorescent orange witch's hat. It seems that road cones of the size usually used by waka kotahi are for sale at prices between $35 and $48, says Blanche, who says, forget Auckland, Waikanae Kapiti Coast has been road cone paradise for more than a year. And another person says road cones are being overused all over New Zealand. As a travelling entertainer with our grandsons, we recently estimated 780 road cones between Otaki and Wellington. Most were not associated with active work. On the ferry situation and cancellations, this person says, my ferry tickets changed, no problem at all. 30 minutes on hold and a lovely fella fixed it with no drama. Those poor staff are doing amazingly to keep their composure and humour in the circumstances. But it is a mixed bag in terms of their ferry. Tom's got in touch to say, had to cut our holiday short by 2 days to get ourselves and a vehicle back across the Cook Strait. Our friend's car is stuck in Picton until April when they were cancelled. On the subject of the prize pool on the ultra marathon, this person says, women and men's ultra marathon prize money is ultra sexist. There is a big difference between the two sexes.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, ngā mihi o te pō. I'm Evie Ashton. Immigration New Zealand is looking into whether anti-transgender activist Kelly J. Keen Minshall will be allowed into New Zealand after neo-Nazis attended one of her events in Australia. Supporters of Ms. Keen Minshall gave Nazi salutes and abused LGBT counter-protesters at an event in Melbourne at the weekend. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says he doesn't want to comment on the immigration process, but says people using the right to free speech shouldn't be using it to incite violence or hateful behaviour.
I condemn people who use their right to free speech to do that in a way that seeks to deliberately create division. It's not something that I would attend or would engage with, and I don't think it's helpful overall to social cohesion or to actually rational and constructive debate.
Chris Hipkins says he hasn't looked at following the state of Victoria in banning the Nazi salute. Meanwhile, Mr Hipkins is describing the new police minister as a safe pair of hands. Ginny Anderson was only sworn in as a cabinet minister last month, but now replaces Stuart Nash, who resigned last week. Ginny Anderson was initially given the portfolios of small business, seniors and the digital economy and communications. Barbara Edmonds will take over her associate immigration portfolio. New Zealand's share market is down around 1.3% despite a deal backed by the Swiss government to rescue that country's biggest bank. UBS is taking over its rival Credit Suisse after a day of emergency talks between the two banks and the country's financial regulators. The BBC's Simon Jack reports on the deal.
Global interest rates have rocketed as countries have tried to bring down inflation caused mainly by higher energy prices. Now that sudden change has hit the value of some of even the safest investment. The banks keep some of their money in. So the big question is, are we back to 2008? Is this a rerun of the financial crisis? Well, this is precisely what the authorities are trying to avert. They, in the US and the UK, are saying they support this particular deal, and they stress that banks are strong, much stronger than they were in 2008, and people's savings and deposits are safe.
Some Littleton businesses say they've suffered financial losses from the new inaugural Sale GP event over the weekend. An estimated 15,000 people converged on the harbour town, but some firms say that having been fully staffed and stocked up, they were disappointed by the lack of customers. One restaurant owner, Sani Bennett, says Littleton largely felt like a ghost town.
There was a wee buff on that from the little busy spells that we had, but overall, yeah, for products and wages, definitely would have lost.
Sani Bennett says it's frustrating because the restaurant had been told to gear up for one of the busiest weekends ever. One of Auckland's biggest power companies says the number of traffic cones on the city's roads is overkill. Vector says it agrees with complaints from Mayor Wayne Brown about the issue. Chief Executive Simon Mackenzie told Checkpoint that the current rules for traffic management are too disruptive.
We think that there's a much better way that it can be done, taking into account the areas, the volume of traffic, what is the risk, time of day, how can they also be shifted at different times of day to make it better for customers.
Simon Mackenzie says safety is important, but the amount of disruption traffic management causes can be ridiculous. The Foreign Minister leaves for China tomorrow, the first visit there by a New Zealand minister since 2019. Nanaia Mahuta will meet with her Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang, in Beijing. She says she intends to raise New Zealand's concerns about regional and global security challenges, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and will also discuss trade, climate and environmental issues. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says it's important that New Zealand raises issues with the Chinese government in person. Justice ministers from around the world will meet in London tonight to discuss increasing support for the International Criminal Court. It comes after the court issued an arrest warrant for the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, hailed the court's decision.
The evil state will be held accountable for every act of terror against Ukrainians. This week has finally brought a truly significant international legal result for Ukraine, for justice.
Mr. Putin has been accused of illegally deporting hundreds of children from Ukraine. Moscow rejects the charges and says the court has no legal power in Russia. Dunedin residents have been told to brace for stormy weather with possible flooding in areas around the city tonight. Significant rain and strong winds are forecast from 10 o'clock tonight until 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Dunedin City Council says it's working hard to be prepared and its focus is on low-lying areas most susceptible to flooding. It says coastal roads are also at risk from large waves, especially on the 4 o'clock high tide. And the carcasses of millions of fish that are rotting in a New South Wales river are likely to end up in landfill. It's believed the deaths on the Darling Barker River have been caused by an unseasonal heatwave with temperatures reaching 40 degrees Celsius at the weekend. Locals are describing the smell as putrid. An emergency hub has been set up to coordinate the clean-up and monitor water quality. And in sport, Sri Lanka's lower order batters are providing some resistance to the New Zealand bowling attack in the second cricket test in Wellington. New Zealand need 2 more wickets for a dominant victory. A short time ago, Sri Lanka were 349 for 8 in their second innings, still trailing the Black Caps' first innings total by 67 runs. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, Rotorua's housing crisis is hitting elderly renters so hard that Age Concern's Affordable Tiny House Rental Initiative has been oversubscribed. After Cyclone Gabrielle, what can we learn about disaster-proofing our telecommunications networks? The latest on Donald Trump's claims that he's about to be arrested, and author of Water Always Wins, Erica Guys, on combating flood and drought by making space for water's natural ebb and flow. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Warnings and watches are in force for heavy rain and strong winds about central and southern parts of New Zealand. For Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, also for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. A few showers tomorrow, then a period of rain from the afternoon. From Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaru Nui and Taihape, also for Wairarapa, showers at times, but a period of rain tomorrow morning with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Taranaki. Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain overnight, mainly fine tomorrow, but showers in the afternoon and evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north to reach Bulla this evening with heavy falls and thunderstorms, becoming fine south of Hokitika tomorrow morning and elsewhere later. Canterbury, occasional rain, persistent tomorrow with heavy falls. Otago and Southland, rain developing today with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, fine today, a few showers tomorrow, then rain at night. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Nā mihi o e hoa, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Cyclone damage and fickle ferry crossings are just some of the challenges facing deer hunters as they count down to this year's roar that peaks Easter weekend. The breeding season runs from late March through April, with stags most vocal in the middle 2 weeks, and it's considered one of the most important events on the game hunting calendar. But some popular stomping grounds have been nailed by Cyclone Gabrielle. A number of hunters have lost all their gear, and the on-again, off-again Cook Strait ferry crossings are also an annoyance. New Zealand Deer Stalkers Association Chief Executive Officer and General Counsel Gwyn Thurlow is with us now. Kia ora, that's a few challenges and we'll get to some of them shortly, but can you start off by just letting people know, how significant is the roar to deer hunters?
Oh, good evening. Yeah, this is the event of the year. It's the one that we planned for since last roar, and it's the main time where everyone's in the hills trying to get that trophy stag or buck of a lifetime.
Yeah, and so the cyclone recently, what impact has it had on, maybe popular hunting areas?
Yeah, so that area of New Zealand is one of the go-to places for hunting. So you got the Kawekas, the Kaimanuas and Te Araweras up north, and the local populations there are quite rural and they enjoy being part of our hunting traditions in New Zealand, and many of those families look forward to this time of year to recreate and go hunting, and they've been hit just as hard as the farmers as well. And as the Deer Stalkers, we've rallied together and we're doing what we're calling the Hunters for Hunters project, where we're taking donations of hunting equipment from our members and then redeploying it in the hardest hit areas and trying to kit families out so they can go out this roar and don't miss out.
So that's the gear that they need that they might have lost in the cyclone. What about the physical areas, like the bush that you would be going into? Is it still safe? Does it look a little different this year because of the cyclone?
It's certainly going to look a lot different. The last time we saw a similar event was Cyclone Bowler, and it knocks over mature trees, it washes out tracks, it changes river courses, and one of the messages is to those guys this year is things could look different, and be prepared for things to take a different amount of time than it did in the previous roars, and make sure you have all the right equipment like the PLBs and the safety equipment, and give your plans over to your family and friends, as all hunters should do this roar. And there it will be particularly interesting to see the photos that are coming out, because hunters go way off track and they go into parts of the bush seldom visited by other people. So most trampers and hikers will be on the main tracks and staying at the huts, whereas the hunters will see some unusual things this year. So no doubt we'll get some interesting reports on what the bush looks like.
And do you know yet if it's had any direct impact on the deer population?
It's too hard to tell. Interestingly, the deer probably won't be too fazed by this. They, in fact, may be finding a bit of extra forage. So a lot of the deer on that side of the kawikas and the kaimanuas, they have sika deer, and the sika deer love to find fallen trees to forage on. So I'm sure the deer are doing fine, and they'll be there waiting for the hunters to come in the next month.
So, what about the ferries? How much of a pain is that for your people wanting to get out and hunt?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not COVID disrupting people this year. It's the mechanical breakdowns and the lack of ferries. So most of New Zealand's hunters make the trip to the South Island, and they'll hit the west coast and they'll hit the deep south Fiordland and go into the Alps. And some of those communities rely on hunters to book accommodation, spend their money there and go hunting. And again, this year we've been hampered. This is the third year in a row where inter-island travel is challenging for the hunting community, and it's just a bit of a shame because it's a peak time for people to move between the islands.
You a bit disappointed by that?
I am. I've got a ferry booked on the 4th. I'm heading into North Canterbury around the Lewis Pass, Nelson Lakes. And I'm a bit apprehensive myself whether or not the ferry is going to go. And I've got a helicopter booked. And if I miss my ballot drop-off, that's my whole trip interfered with. So a lot of hunters will be a bit nervous that their ferry is going to be there and make all their connections to their booked helicopters and so on. So, yeah, nervous times.
This season you've got new rules under the Arms Code, don't you, about transporting guns? Yeah,
well, it's one of many reforms that the firearms sectors face. So last year, police or the Firearms Authority released new guidance on how to transport firearms, and this is off the back of the new law in 2020 and then new regulations. And there's some improvements, but there are some changes. So things like you're allowed to transport your rifle in your vehicle as long as it's out of sight, it's secure, you've got your ammunition locked up separately. And these are slight changes, and they're good changes, something that we endorse. It's good to be safe and responsible with firearms. But this year, people do need to be mindful that the rules have changed.
And the kind of peak time coincides with the Easter break. Does that provide any challenges in terms of sharing space with people who are doing other types of recreation in the bush, like hiking?
It certainly does, and it puts hikers and hunters on the same road ends and the same tracks together. And, a lot of the time hunters are really responsible and respectful, and they're good people to share huts with. And it's more that the trampers might not be used to seeing people with firearms, or it causes nervousness. And I think the main thing is that we'll all be in the hills together, we'll all be doing it safely. And just to be mindful that you will see people with firearms, and it's the time of year where people get out and, do what's so great about being a Kiwi, which is enjoying our backcountry, hunting and gathering and being out with mates.
I suppose the reverse of that is always identify your target.
That's correct. That's the key message this year that everyone's trying to say is identify your target, be safe, have fun, and we'll all be out there together at Easter. And you never know, if you're a lucky tramper, you might have a bit of venison backsteak at a hut one night that a hunter's brought home for you.
Thank you for joining us, Gwyn. That's Gwyn Thurlow, who is the New Zealand Deer Stalkers Association Chief Executive Officer and their General Counsel. It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Will a government-backed deal to buy out troubled banker Credit Suisse be enough to contain a crisis of confidence that's threatening to engulf international finance markets? Rival Swiss bank UBS Group is buying Credit Suisse for $4.8 billion with the help of the Swiss government. That's less than half of what Credit Suisse was worth last week. Swiss regulators were first forced to step in to help, and now the US Federal Reserve is also shoring up its own financial system. ABC Business reporter Dan Zeifer explains the situation.
Well, money is a tradable commodity. Banks buy it, sell it and store it. The issue with Credit Suisse was there was a concern that it was going to become illiquid or perhaps not solvent, as in not having enough money to cover its commitments from what clients wanted to take out their money as people got increasingly concerned about it. There's been essentially a sweetheart deal where its Swiss rival will take it over, backed by the Swiss Central Bank. So what they're doing is they're stepping in to try and prevent a crisis of confidence that's come from Credit Suisse being in trouble, spilling out into the Swiss financial system and the broader global financial system as this really massive name, one of these kind of what's called globally systemically important banks, looked really close to falling over. It's been saved. Will that injection of confidence be enough to stabilise the financial system? What we saw in 2008 with the collapse of really big names like Lehman Brothers is that it did cause this crisis in confidence, and even banks that were dealing with things well got caught up in it. The price of money got more difficult. Calculating risk became incredibly difficult and more expensive. And so that causes kind of problems in the fluidity and the movement of money around the world. So what central bankers in all different countries are trying to do now is, first of all, check that their banks are okay, that they do have enough money to meet their commitments, and then stabilise them and try and boost confidence so we don't have this global contagion where people around the world and businesses around the world start to be worried about the safety of their banks.
And to the Ukraine now, the exiled mayor of Mariupol has condemned Vladimir Putin's surprise visit to the Ukrainian city, which was seized by Russian forces last year. He's compared the Russian president to a criminal returning to the scene of his crime after Russian forces devastated Mariupol in one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. From Kiev, here's the BBC's James Landale.
For both sides in this war, the city of Mariupol is rich with symbolism. So it was perhaps inevitable that Vladimir Putin would one day pay a visit. For Ukraine, the industrial port on the Sea of Azov is an emblem of its resilience, the place where its fighters held out for 3 long months last year. For Russia, it is the scene of a notable victory, the city that was finally occupied by its forces last May after being bombarded into submission. But it was also the place where Russian airstrikes destroyed a maternity hospital and a theatre where hundreds of civilians sheltered and died. In Kyiv, the mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Bochenko, told me what Mr. Putin's visit meant to him.
Like all Ukrainians, like all Mariupol residents, I feel that today a war criminal whose name is Vladimir Putin visited the scene of a crime he committed for several months, destroying the city of Mariupol. The only city where Russian aviation used carpet bombing is Mariupol.
Mr. Putin arrived in Mariupol by helicopter and drove himself around the city. His aim, it would appear, to show off a city being reconstructed. Local reports suggest much of Mariupol is still in ruins, with residents facing shortages of food. But Russian state television showed Mr. Putin visiting a rebuilt residential area and the inside of a new apartment, visits the Kremlin described as spontaneous. The Russian leader even inspected a new playground, only days after international prosecutors accused him of illegally deporting children to Russia. This visit was seen by many as Mr. Putin's response, a show of defiance to his international opponents, a show of confidence for Russians back home.
The UK government's latest budget sets out its plan to try to curb the country's cost of living crisis. It's the key issue for many voters in the country right now. Since the war in Ukraine began, more people in Britain have been struggling to pay their bills. One charity that specialises in helping British Muslims with financial problems says it's been overwhelmed with requests for assistance. The BBC's Michael Buchanan reports.
For a few hours a day, 2-year-old Ali has his house and his mother to himself before his 4 siblings return from school. Berlin is separated from the children's father. The family live off £236 a week. It's not enough, and she's built up large debts trying to raise 5 children alone.
They don't understand. They will ask me everything. Can you buy this? Can you buy that? They have to ask me something they want. Sometimes I say, tomorrow, we will do tomorrow, and they forget sometimes.
Muslim communities in Britain are disproportionately poorer than the rest of the country. Poverty levels are particularly high among people of Bangladeshi, Pakistani and Black African heritage. This charity distributes zakat, money donated by Muslims to help fellow Muslims in need. Demand for its hardship fund is greater than ever. Some months they're seeing over 2,000 applications.
Zakat especially has always been seen in the Muslim psyche in Britain, certainly. It's for people who are homeless, foodless, in some far-off land. And just to overcome that, tell people it's okay, the community is here for you, zakat is yours as well. That's difficult for us.
We're seeing a record number of people accessing support.
At the East London Mosque, what started as a response to the pandemic has become an ongoing lifeline.
A lot of our families, they live in very overcrowded housing situations. It is a community that has always been in poverty, that's really struggled with employment, and it doesn't really help the fact that things are really expensive.
For Asiara, her rent's the big problem. It's increased by £200 to £1,500 a month.
I have 2 children who I need to feed, but I can't work. It's so cold and chilly out there, and I have no alternative but to come here.
There's a huge stigma in Muslim communities around asking for help from charities. But when bills are rising this rapidly, faith and family can only go so far.
Australia's biggest ever skin cancer study has been hit by a data breach, with the personal details of more than 1,000 people possibly taken by hackers. The company holding the information was planning on deleting it after a year, but was hit by a cyber attack before it could do so. The ABC's Danny Tran reports.
When a skin cancer study landed in Paul Woodbridge's letterbox, he felt like it was his duty to take part.
Well, I thought, I'll be a good citizen. I live in Queensland, Australia's the sunburn capital of the world and the melanoma place of the world. I don't have melanoma or anything, but I don't want to get it and I don't want more people to get sick. I just thought I'll participate in it. It's for the public good.
The Q-Skin study is being run by scientists at the QIMR Berghofer Medical Research Institute in Brisbane, who are trying to figure out how skin cancers and melanomas develop. It's Australia's biggest skin cancer study and has involved about 50,000 people over more than a decade.
It asks all different health questions, about my skin and moles and things like that. It also had sections in there about family history, my previous medical history, drug use, alcohol use, smoking.
It also asks participants if they'd been feeling depressed or anxious or whether they'd been through a recent divorce. In 2021, Paul Woodbridge was one of the more than 1,000 people who took part in the survey, which stated that all the data would be treated confidentially. But in November last year, Paul Woodbridge was contacted by QIMR Berghofer, telling him that a private data processing company hired by the Institute to process the survey results had suffered a cyber security breach. It's left a 61-year-old disability pensioner from Brisbane reeling.
It just makes you a little bit crazy because you can't see the end of it. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what's out there and I don't know how it's going to end. And nobody seems to want to help me.
The ABC has seen a leaked email sent days later from the study's principal investigator to a participant, which said their survey data may have been compromised. QIMR Berghofer has told the ABC that names, addresses and Medicare numbers of 1,128 people may have been compromised, but says that no other information, including genetic data, was held by the processing company. The Institute says it notified participants of the breach in accordance with the recommendation of the Office of the Information Commissioner of Queensland.
Twice in a matter of days, British and German fighter jets have intercepted Russian fighter jets near Estonia's airspace. Russian aggression is a major concern for the NATO alliance. So is protecting Northern Europe and its vital energy supply. CNN's Fred Pleitgen has more.
As tensions mount after the collision between a Russian plane and a US drone over the Black Sea, NATO's head tells me the alliance stands firmly behind the US.
What you've seen is reckless and irresponsible behavior by Russia that led to this incident in the Black Sea. The good thing is that the United States behaved utmost professionally.
And security on the seas is a huge issue for NATO. We flew to one of Europe's largest gas fields with the Secretary General and the head of the EU Commission as NATO warships were guarding the rig, watchful for possible acts of sabotage.
The U.S. and its allies understand full well that Russia's war in Ukraine is a threat not just to the skies above the seas and on the seas, but also to critical infrastructure under the sea as well. That's why the NATO alliance is beefing up its efforts to protect this critical infrastructure.
New findings after years of research into climate change will be presented at a UN conference tonight, high in the Swiss Alps. But the publication of this major report has been held up amid a battle between rich and developing countries over emissions targets and financial aid. What is clear, though, is how climate change is affecting the Alps itself. The BBC's Justin Rowlett reports.
Dave Searle is climbing an ice face high in the Alps.
It's like super exciting, you know, there's so much happening and going on.
His safety depends on the strength of the ice.
And you're listening for a good thunk and making sure that the ice axe isn't wobbly.
But the ice in the high mountains of Europe and the world is changing.
For me, it's been quite shocking how fast it's been developing. The winters are just much more mild. We're getting rain higher up the mountain.
The greenhouse gases emitted since the Industrial Revolution have already raised global temperatures by a little over 1 degree, but the effects are even greater in the Alps.
The temperature up here is rising by about twice the global average. It has already increased by 2 degrees Celsius, and it is having a devastating effect on the snow and the ice up here.
At an observatory 3.5 kilometres up this Swiss mountain, they've been monitoring the changing alpine climate for decades.
30 years ago, it never rained. But nowadays, in summer, very often there is rain, even up here on 3,500 meters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Last year, the ice melt hit a new record. The glaciers of the Alps lost 6% of their total volume.
The very best forecast for the future of alpine glaciers is that we can save about 1/3 of the ice volume. This is the best case. In the worst case, we're going to lose everything.
Look how the glacier below the weather station is expected to retreat over the next few decades in that worst case scenario. So what does Dr. Huss think the message from the UN scientists should be?
Action is now urgently needed. For the glaciers, we see the effects of climate change. This is illustrating how urgent it is to act now.
This landscape appears eternal, literally frozen in time. But without dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, the ice up here at the top of Europe will be lost forever.
On your feedback, it seems you're pretty evenly split over the bonus prize for a record time in an ultra marathon that's coming up. This person says the longer the distance, the less the gender gap. Women are tough. It's not like 100 metres or a half marathon. But on the other hand, another listener says there are different qualifying criteria for Olympic events. This guy is tone deaf. Thank you for all your feedback. Don't forget, if you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up speaks to a Lower Hutt pie maker who reckons tomorrow could be the best day of his life when Prime Minister Chris Hipkins come for lunch. Yum, yum. I wonder what exactly is on the menu. Tune in tomorrow, 5 a.m. First up, and we'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō. I'm Evie Ashton. Immigration New Zealand is considering whether a British anti-transgender activist will be allowed into the country. The Foreign Minister will tomorrow make the first visit to China by a New Zealand minister since 2019. The Prime Minister says government agencies shouldn't be using lobbying firms to run communications strategies. And the police are advising people in Southland and Otago to stay indoors tonight because of heavy rain warnings. There's also a thunderstorm warning for Westland. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.